Good morning. Thank you for participating in Morehead at Home Skywatching, hosted by Morehead Planetarium and Science Center. My name is Amy Sale. I'm an educator at Morehead. We are a unit of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, located on campus. We also work throughout the state through a number of outreach initiatives like our mobile lab vans, summer camp programs, and the annual North Carolina Science Festival. Our mission is to help people better understand science, technology, and health, and we do this through engaging learning opportunities like this live virtual event. We're happy to have you here today for our program on Carolina skies, and Nick will get us started.
Thanks, Amy. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Morehead at Home Skywatching. We're excited that you're here with us today. Happy July. I can't believe we're already cruising through our summer. And today we have a topic that's related to the month of July. Our topic for today is the early July Carolina skies. So if you've ever visited us on the campus of UNC at Morehead, our kind of flagship planetarium program is called Carolina Skies. It's a live presentation, pretty customizable because it's a show where our ramblers, which is what we call our Carolina Skies presenters, get up and tell you what's going on up there in the sky above you. So in the absence of a planetarium show, we wanted to make sure to kind of provide some of that space here online for you. So we're going to give you a look at some of the prominent things that are going to be up in the early evening, in the middle of the night, and even the early morning tonight in our sky. So I know that there might be some of us watching from places that are not Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and that's okay. You might just have to do a little bit of research on your own, or maybe we'll give you some tips for how to find what your sky is going to look like. But if you're in the southeastern United States, this is going to be a pretty good look at what's up there. So a couple of housekeeping things before we get into our stargazing. Number one, we want to hear your questions. We love talking, but also we love listening and love hearing your questions. But in the absence of your voices, the way we want you to ask questions is by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So if you have something you'd like to ask about the sky or astronomy or astronauts, whatever you would like to ask us, and we'll try to take some time at the end of the session today to answer those questions. Also, the program we're going to be using to simulate the sky is kind of like a flat screen planetarium. It's called Stellarium. It's a free open source software that has been really useful for us in projecting, this 3D world that we live in on a flat screen. And as I share that with you, we'll explain a little bit about how that works if this is your first time with us. So what do you think, Amy? Are we ready to go ahead and share and look at the sky?
Yeah, let's take a look. So we'll start out with the sky as it looks like right now in Chapel Hill. And I don't know about you, Nick. I see one really bright thing.
Yeah, and I see a bright thing up in the sky. It also kind of looks like the ground around us is pretty bright. So just for reference, the sky is going to be up here. This is a kind of strange curved view because, again, we're imagining what's up above us, but in a flat way on our screens here. So that one bright thing that's up in the sky is a star, and it's our star, the sun.
All right, and I also see some red letters.
Yeah, so this is a thing you wouldn't see in the real sky. These big red letters help us kind of track which way we're facing and which direction we're looking in the sky. So right in front of us here, S is for south. On our right, you'll see the W for west. On our left, E for east, and in between, you might see southeast, southwest. You won't see these big red letters in the real sky, unfortunately. But that's one way to kind of keep track of where we're going. So I'll tell you, you might be missing north right now if you feel kind of like a completionist and don't see all of your cardinal directions. North is behind us. So if there's anything in particular we want to look at in the north, the cool thing is we can move that way. But I think we wanted to make it a little later. We're not just stargazing at the sun. Of course, you wouldn't want to go outside and do that. It's not safe just to look at the sun with your eyes unless you have a very special solar telescope with an appropriate filter. We want to stargaze at night. So let's move forward.
Okay, we better get that bright star, the sun, below the horizon. And we've got a question for you all. We will be looking at stars and planets, and we're wondering if you all have a particular planet you are most excited to see in the sky. And there are 5 planets that you can see just with your eyes: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. So go ahead and pick pick the one that you feel most excited about potentially seeing in the sky, and we'll see what we can do.
There's no right answer. You know, you
Yeah.
can
Oh,
totally pick
Nick,
the one that you want to see. Well,
look
actually,
what
pause.
just rose. Still daytime and the moon rose. That's because it's waxing gibbous. It rises before the sun sets. So that's something you can look for. If your bedtime is kind of on the early side and maybe at this time of the year, you don't actually get to see a dark sky because you have to go to bed before the stars come out at night, you actually can see something interesting in the sky while it's still daytime. Today, July 2nd, the moon is waxing gibbous, which means it'll rise before sunset. So you might look for it if you're out. It'll be rising roughly 6:20 p.m. for central North Carolina. So you might want to try more like 7 or 8 p.m. to get it above any trees.
That's a really good point. And I see we have some answers from y'all.
Oh, and I don't know about you, Nick. I'm kind of relieved that nobody put Mercury as the one they really wanted to see, because we had bad news if you did. It's basically in line of sight with the sun right now, so it's not a good time to see. Mercury is up in the daytime. But we have a lot of fans of, it looks like, Mars and Saturn in particular, and then Jupiter and Venus. And we can show you those four.
Yeah, all of you are in luck if you want to see those 4 planets. It just might take a whole night of observing, and you'll see why. Just so you can keep track of our night, by the way, I didn't mention this, but right here at the bottom of the Stellarium screen, you can kind of see where my cursor is. Just below that, that's where our date and time controls are. So that's important because it might look a little different than something you're used to seeing as far as how the date and time are presented. We have our year, 2020, 07, that's July. Today is the 2nd. And then we have our clock. It's on a 24-hour clock. Some folks know that as military time. It says 2029. That means it's 8 p.m. or 8:29 p.m. So you can keep track of that as we move through the night as well. But I know we noticed that moon, Amy. Do we want to get a closer look?
Yeah, let's take a closer look. And if you have binoculars or a telescope at home, you should try taking a look at the moon. You'll want to be careful, of course, if you are observing the moon when it's still daytime, you must be careful not to aim your binoculars or telescope at the sun. And oh, Nick, I see lots of interesting features. I see some dark spots, some brighter areas.
I see craters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some of these really interesting places on the moon's surface where rocks from space have whacked into the moon. And you know, the moon has a very thin atmosphere, but it doesn't have all of that wind and rain and erosion and things like that to kind of wipe away evidence of things hitting it from space. So we kind of get to see that preserved. And you can see those with a telescope or binoculars.
And with just your eyes, you can see that there are those dark patches on the moon, the Maria. And a lot of times people like to imagine shapes in them. Maybe you see a face or a person in the moon or an animal.
Yeah, and I hope we have clear skies this evening, because I know I saw the moon rise in the evening yesterday, and it was a really beautiful sight. So tonight should be nice as well, to check out our lunar neighbor.
So yeah,
Okay.
look for it. Probably easier to look if you look after 7 or 8 p.m. Get it pretty higher. Okay, but people said they wanted to see Saturn in particular. Got a lot of votes. How late are we gonna have to stay up?
We're gonna have to stay up fairly late. I'm gonna move us to about 10:30 p.m.
Okay, and Saturn and Jupiter are rising before 10 p.m. For us, but you do want to stay up probably a little bit later to get them out of the trees or any buildings nearby. And Jupiter's going to be really easy because it is super bright. It's going to be the brightest thing you're going to see in the evening sky other than the moon. The moon will obviously be brighter. And then it'll look like Saturn's right next to it. And in fact, pretty much for the rest of this year, Saturn and Jupiter are going to look like they're pulling closer and closer together. And they're still, of course, in reality, millions of miles away. Jupiter's a little bit closer to us. Saturn's a little bit further away. But they will jump out to you. You can look for that.
So one neat thing about Stellarium is that we're not stuck with this view. We can imagine we all have telescopes right here in our homes, and we can zoom in. So let's start with Jupiter before we start doing some constellation hopping and things like that. Let's get a deeper, closer look at the planets.
Oh, I see some interesting features on Jupiter.
Yeah, we see
And
lots of names and labels, and I know they're almost like kind of covering up the planet Jupiter. But before I zoom in more, I do want to point out that each of these names and labels is pointing to a moon. Jupiter has so many moons, over 65 now, over 70 actually. And I can't. I have a hard time pinpointing the number because we keep finding more. So right now you can see four of the largest satellites, and we call those the Galilean moons of Jupiter: Callisto, Io, Ganymede, and Europa, because they were discovered and observed by Galileo. Um, and that was a big thought, because even over the course of a day, and definitely over the course of a week, you can track how these moons appear to move around the planet Jupiter. And that was one of Galileo's big pieces of evidence that something, or that objects can orbit around something other than the Earth. In his time, that was a big world-shattering view. But he noticed that these moons have their own paths around Jupiter and not around the Earth.
and you can see this for yourself if you have a telescope at home or a good set of binoculars, especially if you can get the binoculars on a tripod. You can tell from night to night that these moons are moving. They will noticeably change positions. And
I gave us a
anything
little
else?
bit of a closer view.
Oh, I see something interesting right there. Yep, looks like the Great Red Spot.
Yeah, and you can see all these kind of big bands of color. Jupiter is a gas giant. It's made almost completely out of gases and liquids. So what you're seeing there is different types of gases and their interactions together. It's a stormy world, and that great red spot that Amy mentioned, that's a large storm that's been raging on Jupiter for as long as we've been observing it, hundreds of years. And just as a size comparison, you could fit about 2 or 3 Earths inside of this red spot alone. So there's a reason why we call Jupiter the king of the planets. It is
Well, there's some
huge.
evidence it's shrinking, so.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that's why I said usually we say 3, but now maybe it's more like 2, and that's an interesting thing that astronomers are looking at. Why might that great red spot be shrinking? We don't fully know.
Okay, now we had a lot of interest in the planet that looked like it was hanging out next to Jupiter, Saturn. A lot of y'all were most excited about seeing Saturn. And I think I know why. Because it's the one with the most spectacular ring system in our entire solar system. And Stellarium is also bringing up view of a few moons as well.
Yeah, Saturn also has moons.
And if you have a telescope at home, you really will see the rings. And we're not going to promise quite this much detail, but it will be obvious that Saturn has rings.
And those rings are really interesting. They seem unique in our solar system because they're so visible and bright. It turns out all the gas giant planets do have rings. Saturn's are kind of special because of what they're made of. These rings are made mostly out of water ice, just like you have in your freezer at home. There are definitely bits of rock and things like that within the ring system, but that water ice is really, really reflective. So the whole reason we see planets is because the sun's light is bouncing off of them, reflecting off of them, coming back to us here on the Earth. So same thing happens with the material in the rings. Sunlight hits it, we're able to see them a little better. The rings of something like Jupiter or Neptune or Uranus, they're mostly rocky, so we don't see that reflection quite as much. But we are starting to learn more about them. But Saturn's definitely the most beautiful here in our solar system.
Okay, so remember to look for Jupiter and Saturn on your next clear night. If you are the kind of person who stays up kind of late, they are rising by 10 p.m. They're rising earlier and earlier each night, by the way. So if it's not convenient for you now, maybe it will be later in the year. And then I think we've got some sort of constellations, some patterns of stars in that area that we'd like to point out, kind of in the vicinity where the moon happens to be hanging out tonight. And what do you think? Oh, looks like, Nick, you're pointing out a bright star. It'll look reddish to you in the night. That's Antares. the heart of Scorpius, the scorpion. And we pointed this out in a few previous Morehead at Home sessions as well. So you may recognize it. And there it is. Ends with that stinger, those 2 stars make a nice stinger. And you might think, oh, I know how to find Scorpius. I'll just look for the moon. Well, that'll work well for you tonight, but the moon is always on the move, noticeably. So, you know, by tomorrow night, it'll have moved to kind of to the left on your screen at this point. And then there's a constellation right to the left of it that looks to me like a teapot.
Yeah, maybe you see a spout, a lid, a small curved handle, and a base. Let's try to illuminate it. Oh, there's other pieces of the teapot.
Oh, yeah, it's not just a teapot. It's actually Sagittarius, the archer, which is a centaur, half man, half horse, and it looks like he's aiming at the scorpion there. That scorpion better watch out.
Yeah.
So easiest part to find, though, is the asterism, that informal star pattern within the constellation, the teapot.
Yeah, and you know, we are bringing up connect the dot lines and pictures and things like that. Remember that you're not going to see those in the sky. But if you use your imagination, maybe you can imagine an archer or a scorpion up there. Different cultures all over the world have told many different stories about these objects. So I always kind of remind myself of that. And that it's important to use our imagination. So even if you don't draw the pictures, you know, in exactly the same way, you can at least have an idea of what some folks have seen up there. And in fact, in this region of the sky, there's kind of a little known constellation that we wanted to point out because it has some neat stories associated with it. And in reality, it's 2 constellations. So just above the moon tonight, and as Amy said, that's not the most reliable method for finding something, you know, other than in a really short period of time, like this evening. But in the same region of the sky as Sagittarius and Scorpius is a unique constellation because it kind of splits another constellation in half. This is called Ophiuchus, and on either side of Ophiuchus, these star patterns connect to make serpens, which, as you can see, is a snake. So this constellation is interesting for a number of reasons, but it's kind of timely because tonight, you know, it's right in the same direction as some of the other big, interesting, attractive things in the sky. It might be hard to connect the dots to this pattern, but I think Ophiuchus has a really cool story. Ophiuchus is the Greek mythology name of this figure. In Roman mythology, he's also known as Asclepius. And there's a pretty cool story that I'll summarize for you about Asclepius. He was a healer. He was a doctor of his time, essentially. And long story short, he observed how snakes had healing properties. The myth goes that he saw one snake bring another snake a healing herb and realized, oh, we can heal each other, we can take care of each other, and cure death. That was his goal, was to make it so that no living creatures on earth had to die. Pretty noble goal. Well, the gods from the pantheon of Roman mythology did not take kindly to this, especially Pluto, who was the god of the underworld. You might also know him as Hades in Greek mythology. So Pluto complained that this guy is trying to make it so that nobody can die. Nobody's going to come to the underworld. And his brother, Jupiter, also known as Zeus, said, well, we can take care of that. This healer, he's done really good work, but can't cheat death. So we're going to take care of him and put him up into the sky. And interestingly enough, the way that Jupiter, I always mix them up, depending on which mythology I'm talking about. The way that Jupiter did this was he sent an eagle, which we will get to in just a moment, named Aquila the eagle, down, snatched up Ophiuchus, and brought him up into the sky with his friend, the snake. So kind of a complicated myth, but one of the really cool takeaways is that we still see the symbology of Ophiuchus and Asclepius around us in the world all the time. You might have seen the caduceus, the symbol on an ambulance or a hospital, the rod with a snake twirled around it. Some know that as the rod of Asclepius because he was known as a healer back in Greek and Roman times. So a neat story that we don't always tell in the summertime, but it's a pretty prominent shape up there in the sky. And we'll get to why Aquila is important in just a moment too.
Yeah, thanks so much for that story, Nick. I love that one. And So I think we've got a question for you, which is we're going to show you the summer triangle, and we wonder how many of you have already seen it in the sky before. So have you ever seen the summer triangle? And your choices are yes, no, or maybe you're not sure if you've seen it or not. And so we'll give you a few moments to think about that. And you can probably make some guesses. Triangle, how many stars might be in something called the summer triangle? I don't know. What do you think, Nick?
I'm thinking it's three, but I see lots of patterns of three stars up there in the sky.
I do. You could probably make a lot of triangles out of the dots on your screen right now. So I'll give you a few seconds. Okay. Okay. Interestingly. Okay. So about half of you all said, no, you haven't seen it before. A quarter of you said yes. And then a quarter of you aren't really sure. So let's make sure we identify it then.
Sure. Well, one of the easy ways to start identifying it is by finding a star that we already kind of pointed out. It's the brightest star in Aquila the Eagle. So if you're in the neighborhood of Scorpius and Sagittarius and Ophiuchus and Serpens, and tonight the planets and the moon, one of the next brightest stars you can find is Altair. It's part of this summer triangle. But you'll notice when we point out the triangle that the summer triangle itself is not a constellation. It's just a familiar pattern or grouping of stars. It actually is three separate constellations, and each of their brightest stars makes up the triangle. So that's one of them. Where should we go next?
I think we should go to Vega. It looks like it must be pretty bright because it's got a label on it. And in fact, it is a very bright star. And then there's one more star in that vicinity. See if y'all can find maybe what is the final point of the triangle. Nick is showing you with his pointer, Deneb, which means tail in Arabic, and it's the tail of a swan, Cygnus the swan. And if you can imagine forming a triangle from Deneb in Cygnus, Vega and Lyra, and Altair in Aquila, it's a pretty big triangle. And it straddles sort of the Milky Way, the plane of our galaxy. And can we cheat a little bit and take us to a little bit of a darker sky?
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is something you would not see happen right here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, but I'm going to take away some of our horizon glow and our light pollution, and we're going to make it really dark for this next story.
Okay, so just really briefly, in case you're wondering how that swan got into the sky, so there's a story about that, and it has to do with Phaethon, who you don't see in the sky. He was the son of Helios, and Helios, his job was to drive the sun chariot across the sky. And move the sun from east to west every day. Now, if you've been to some of our previous sessions, you know that there's actually no sun chariot driving the sun across the sky. It's really Earth that's spinning. Nick demonstrated that very nicely with the twirl of his chair the other day. But it looks to us like the sun moves across the sky. And so in the story, it's Helios who does this. Well, his son Phaethon decided that really what he wanted more than anything was to take a turn driving the sun chariot one day. And so he did, and it did not go well. He ended up flying way too close to Earth, was burning up the Earth. He got way too high in the heavens, and Zeus had to get busy with his thunderbolts and toss a thunderbolt at Phaethon, who then tumbled out of the sun chariot, fell to the ground, and according to the story, died. And I guess Ophiuchus wasn't around to revive him because he was just dead. And his friend, he had a loyal friend with an odd name, Cycnus, who dove into the waters of the river Eridanus, where Phaethon had fallen into, and retrieved all the bones and gave his friend a proper burial. And then Zeus, to demonstrate, to honor Cycnus's loyalty to his dead friend, he turned him into a swan. He grew feathers and his nose elongated into a beak, and then placed him in this place of honor in the sky. And you'll notice he's looks like he's heading down the Milky Way, and this is supposed to represent the scorched path of Phaethon's disastrous ride. And in fact, that is not the path that the sun takes over the day. So he was definitely off course when he was driving that sun chariot.
Love that story. And if you're in a dark place, you can get a view of this Milky Way, even just 15, 20 miles outside of the triangle here in North Carolina. We've been able to see it at like Little River Regional Park at our in-person sky watching sessions.
Oh yeah.
So it's a beautiful sight to see, but you do have to be mindful of what kind of bright city lights you're close to.
Yeah, we've also done a sky watching session at House and the Horseshoe, which is a Revolutionary War historic site in the Milky Way. It was amazing. Okay, we are almost out of time, and I know we have another planet we want to show people. Some of you all were very interested in Mars. You're going to have to stay up late if you want to see Mars. It is currently rising after midnight. Or you can get up insanely early if you would like. Get up so early it's still dark out, and Mars will be actually very nicely placed in the sky. It'll look reddish in the sky. It'll be pretty bright.
And when I clicked on Mars, it also brought up the constellation that Mars is within. So an interesting thing is, even though we draw the lines and see the pictures, really what astronomers think about are the regions of the sky. Every piece of the sky is part of one of these official constellations. So even though Mars isn't within the connect the dot lines of Pisces, we would still say tonight it's in Pisces, which means it's in the same direction of that boundary there. And you see all the other constellations we mentioned have their own boundaries too.
Yeah, so the planets, we had a session on this earlier, the planets appear to move in front of the, more or less, the zodiac constellations. That's generally where you're gonna find them. And so Nick, we have just a few minutes. Do we maybe wanna stay up and catch Venus?
Sure.
So interested in Venus as well. Now, if you wanna see Venus for the time being, you are gonna have to commit to basically pulling almost an all-nighter or getting up insanely early. So Venus is rising a couple of hours before the sun. And looks like it's hanging out in the constellation of Taurus, the Bull. And just as a reminder, planets are in our own solar system. They're relatively close to us. All these stars that they might appear like they're in front of, those stars are really far away. Venus is not interacting in any way with any of those stars. And you can see it starts to get light. Venus is absurdly bright. If it is in your sky and you have a view of it, you will not miss it. It will be brighter than anything you'll see, brighter than Jupiter, brighter than anything except the moon and the sun. Although, do we have time to do a little time travel? I know we said this was early July Carolina skies, but there's some fun stuff happening in mid-July we wanted to give you a little preview of.
Sure, we can do it. So one last thing before we hop time, you can see right now all 4 of those planets are up. If you're up at 5-ish in the morning, maybe you can catch them all. I know that's pretty early, but yeah, let's time travel. Let me clean up our sky a little bit here.
Okay, and y'all remember that you can type in questions into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to a couple of them right at the end. We want to show you one more thing. And we've also done a session on this before. The International Space Station, which has people living on it, orbits Earth every 90 minutes. And some of those passes of the space station are visible to us easily with just your own eyes. You don't need binoculars or a telescope or anything. So Nick, I think you're going to take us to July 14th. There's a number of passes this month, but we picked out July 14th because this one for Central North Carolina basically goes right overhead. It's a really good, high, bright pass. Space station, can take a few minutes to work its way across the sky, even though it's going over 17,000 miles an hour. It's just pretty high up. Okay, so where are we at?
We're at about 9:30. You see other satellites zipping by, but you're going to really notice the International Space Station here in a moment. Keep your eyes on the southwestern horizon.
And it looks like a bright white moving star. And you're seeing the sky as a unit move, and that's because time is going forward. Oh, look at that. I see it. Hope you all see it.
This is a really good pass because it's, as you can see, the top of the sky, our zenith, is like right here. So the ISS is going to be passing high overhead, even getting into the neighborhood of the summer triangle that we looked at.
And this pass will be July 14th. It's a Tuesday, and it'll last from 9:57 p.m. Eastern to, 10:04. Yes, 10:04. Southwest and northeast, going pretty much across the top of the sky. If you live somewhere else other than Central North Carolina and you want to get predictions of when you can see the International Space Station, we've dropped into the chat a link for that, spotthestation.nasa.gov, and you can have alerts sent to your email or phone if you want. Okay, and Nick, I think we've probably need to start the Q&A, and we probably have a final poll question for you all. It's really helpful to us if you can tell us how many people are watching this program on your screen. We can see how many accounts there are, but we don't know how many people might be watching on a given account. So if you can just answer that question for us. And, oh, I see one I want to handle real quick, Nick, from Gamma Ray. Isn't Venus called the morning star because it's so bright and rises at dawn? Venus is right now a so-called morning star, although we know it's actually a planet. It's also sometimes called an evening star. It just depends on whether it's up pre-dawn in the morning or up in the sky in the evening. It's right now, for months to come, it will be the so-called morning star because it will be rising before the sun. And yes, it is very bright. It will grab your attention.
Yeah, and I see a related question that says Venus is bright because of the greenhouse effect. In a way, yes. We see Venus because it has really thick clouds that surround it, and those clouds are really good at reflecting sunlight. So what's happening on Venus is technically a greenhouse effect. It's trapping heat, which is what makes the planet so hot. But the reflection of the light off of those clouds is one of the reasons why it's so bright to us. Good question.
All right, I think we're about out of time.
Yep, and I would sit here and answer your questions all day, but I think it's a good time to say, you can join us again on Tuesday, and that way, maybe you can think of some questions over the weekend, and we'll be ready to answer them. We, in true fashion, have rambled our way all the way to the end of our session today, but hopefully we gave you some good tips and tricks for what you can see tonight. Never fear. Later this month, we will go into some other objects that we maybe didn't mention today. So that's the greatest thing about the sky, is it's constantly changing and we constantly have things to look at. So if you liked this session, please check out our other resources at www.moreheadplanetarium.org. You can navigate to the Morehead at Home page and see our whole slate of things that we're doing virtually in this time. If you are a social media person and you want to follow us on Facebook or Instagram, those are Morehead Planetarium. Twitter is at Morehead Planet, and we have a YouTube channel. So just search Morehead Planetarium on YouTube. You can check out our virtual playlist. Maybe even watch a 360 planetarium show on your screen at home. There's lots to do. But otherwise, thanks for all of your great questions. I know Amy and I had a blast today, and we'll see you again next week.
See you Tuesday at 10 Eastern.